Lance Key is both an instructional technology specialist and an online instructor. So he's taught all math classes that range from 6th grade to AP Calculus. So Lance, you've got some really great stuff. I'm going to hand it off to you and let us know what we can learn from you.
Alrighty, thank you. And I'm not able to turn my camera on, so if you would like that on, I think you might have to do that. But as you said, I am an instructional technology specialist for my district, and I'm also an online teacher. Currently, right now, I am teaching 8th grade students integrated math 3, which is a combination of algebra 2 and geometry. So I've got some really sharp students that I'm working with there. As you can see here on the slides, here is some of my certifications that I've gotten. I do work for a virtual school, which is VITAL, which is Virtual Instruction to Accentuate Learning. That is inside of our face-to-face public school district. And I'm also on the Edulastic Innovative team. Now, a lot of you probably are in the same situation that I'm in right now. We actually just canceled our schools in my school district 3 hours ago, and we're going to be out until at least April 1st. And we're sitting here wondering, well, what are we going to do? Well, luckily for me, as you can see also here, I'm a Google certified innovator. So me and the innovators across the world, we had people from Australia to England to Colombia, for California. We all got together and we came up with a plan for all of our districts together. So we were able to collaborate and work together to come up with a plan to be able to do that. So I've got a few links that I shared in here earlier. We're doing a podcast the next few days. There's a bit.ly link there. You can sign up for that. Also, I'm going to be sharing out to my teachers that I work with on a daily basis on my Twitter. So if you want to follow me on my Twitter there, you can. We're doing a podcast there also that will be covering a lot of this because we figured out that we're smarter together, just like you guys. We need help, we need support. And then I'm also a flipped math teacher. So what that means is I record myself using Zoom, and then I push that out to my students and they preload the content beforehand. So that's kind of who I am and what I do. So my classroom, if we'll go on to the next slide, you can see what my classroom looks like on a daily basis. So first off, this is some of my students in one of my labs. If you look on the back 2 TVs, you'll see another one of my classrooms if you zoom in real close. And then on the far right TV is myself. Go ahead to the next picture there. This is another one of my labs here. And then last is my office that I teach from here daily. So I'm teaching one class period a day to all of these students across our district because we can't afford to put one math teacher for 5 students at 5 different middle schools. So I teach it from my desk every day to these guys. So next, we've got, here's kind of the way that I work through this is we've got to have data because when our students come to us, we've got to be able to use data to be able to target instructions for our students. And that's hard enough to do in our face-to-face classes, but we've got to be able to do that. So we're going to target the instruction will be the next thing that we'll do using this data. And the way that we're going to target that instruction is by using flexible content. So this flexible content is going to allow us to meet each student exactly where they're at. And then we had better, in the end, make sure that our students are reflecting on this and owning the learning. Because in this remote learning that we're going to be doing, if the students aren't owning the learning, we're not going to be successful because we're not always going to have mom and dad there looking over their shoulders and things like that. So we've got to make sure that they own that learning. So next, I'd like to talk to you kind of about my workflow and how I make this happen. So I always start off with Edulastic. Edulastic gives me the ability to be able to pre-test my students before every unit. So my students come in at different levels. I don't know what all of them know. So I have to pre-test them and see where they're at because not every student has to do every unit in my classroom. So I want to see exactly where they're at. And then I use my flip content to push out information to them. That's at mrkeysclassroom.com. I push that out to them and they're able to work at their own pace through the material. Then I have to meet one-on-one with them and I use Zoom to do that. But after using Zoom, I'll go in and I need to assess where they're at again. You know, do they get the teaching? Do they understand what's going on? So then I'll use Edulastic again. And you can use this as, you know, like daily bell ringers if you need to. If you need to do lesson checks, check in, check outs, I don't know if you guys do that, or mid-chapter quizzes. So depending on when you set up your assessments that you want to use, that's what I'll do. I'll use Edulastic to give me those benchmarks. So then when I run into an issue and I say, okay, the material that we discovered, a student didn't get it. Then I'm going and I'm looking for some OER resources. So I've got some content like CK12. SMOOP, and Khan Academy. I'm sure most of you are familiar with most of these guys. CK12 is mainly STEM based. They have a lot of great math and science content that you can use. That's completely free, standards based curriculum that you can use. Khan Academy's been around for a long time, so I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. And then SMOOP's another one that we use that actually just got the best test prep, college test prep in the United States last year. So really enjoy using that. And then after we get through with that, we've got to assess again and make sure that the students are where they're needing to be. So we use Edulastic again to do that. So, you know, Edulastic's kind of the glue that holds all this together for me. So I want to look at a couple of little reports right quick to show you what these are looking at so you can understand what I'm talking about. So this is a pre-test that I gave my students a couple of years ago. And I give my students the options. You don't have to take the pretest. If you feel like that you need to go through all of this chapter, you can do that. Or if you want to pretest and test out of some of this chapter, you can do that. So the ones you see here that are in the gray, that's students that chose not to do the pretesting. And then of course, green means they got it right. Yellow means partially right. Red means that they struggle with that. This gives me the ability, you can see those two that have got partial green and a lot of yellow there towards the middle. This gives me the ability to be able to drive my instruction to know this is what my students are going to struggle with. Okay, so on the next slide, this would be an example of a quick little quiz that I would give them. This could be as I said, a lesson checkout or a mid-chapter quiz or a daily bell ringer that I give them. This just lets me know quickly how are my students doing as a whole. So I see they're doing approximately 4 out of 5, 80%. This isn't terrible. But I see this very first question that I got that I had a lot of students that were struggling on this question. So I need to go back and see what standard does that address, and we need to go spend some more time on that standard. Then on the next slide, it actually will break it down for me, and I can see the standard over here to the right. This is what I need to be focusing on. My students are struggling with this. This is where I need to be spending most of my time. Then on the next slide, we've got your quizzes. So first off, my tests. So when I give a test out, this is the view that I like to see as the teacher. Okay, so because I can see quickly, all right, whatever the first couple of standards are, I feel like we're doing pretty good there. In the middle, we're doing all right. There's a few things that we need to, you know, maybe look at. But these standards over here on the far right, my students are really struggling here. And just so you guys know, this is real data that came from my classes from the past year. So this isn't, you know, just some stuff that Edulastic pushed out that we could use. This is real stuff that, you know, we truly could be looking at. The next slide is my grade book that I've got. So my students, as I come in here and I look at these geometry standards that we're doing, all green, of course, is great. You know, and then the red, I can look there and be like, this is what we need to adjust. This is what we need to look at after the chapter's over. There's a couple other things you can look at. So like the student profiles. So as I'm getting ready for end of the year, on the next slide, you'll see our student profile. This is a student that I pulled up here. You see most of it's green, but then I've got one little area here in the geometry that the student maybe was struggled with. So they haven't mastered that standard throughout the year. So when we get ready for end of the year assessments, I know that that's what this student needs to work on. And each student I can get that profile on. On the next slide, it breaks it down into the actual standards, you know, that the students mastered or they need to work on. So again, this is the same student. At the bottom, it breaks it down into those individual standards that we need to look at. So now, as I'm getting ready to start making these assessments, here's kind of my workflow that I go through for the assessments. First thing is I go to my library. So if you go to the library tab, you can see all the assessments that you have created in the past, or there's a little drop-down menu there where you can look for assessments that have been made by Edulastic certified people or that have been made by other people in your district. So I always go right here and I look first and say, all right, there's something here that I can use or I need to start looking elsewhere. There's also, you can put standards in there and start searching that way. Now, if I don't see an assessment that I can just pull from automatically, the next thing that I do is I go straight to the assessment banks. So when you go in there, you can punch in your standard. So go to the next slide, please. You can go in here, you can punch in your standards. I got punched in here in the top left here. This was a geometry standard that we were looking at, and it'll pull you up every assessment item they've got by that standard. So what I do from that point is, if you'll click the screen once, you'll see these red boxes pop up here. There are ID numbers. If you could click the screen, please. you'll see these red boxes pop up here, and there's ID numbers that go to each one of these questions. I will go through and I will write down all those ID numbers, because when you create an assessment, then you can put those ID numbers in and then create your whole test. And then the last thing that I do is if I can't get that, then I go to authoring questions. So I start looking at, all right, I've got to make my own assessments. There's two ways you can do that. You can do it in the library tab, or you can do that in the assessments tab. And if you'll click twice, maybe 3 times for me, here are your question types that you have for each one. And as someone was saying earlier, even if you don't know how to do this, there is a question mark on each one of these assessment types that will take you to a video of how to create the assignments for each one of those. So that's kind of my workflow. As I said, I know that you guys are kind of the same place that I am right now. My best advice to you guys right now is find some team members, find your PLN that you can work with that can help you pull this off and work together.
Thank you, Lance. I think the one thing that stands out to me is the pre-test might be hugely valuable, even more so than normal in a situation like this, because you can really get a feel for where the students are starting. And then by the post-test, you can see if this distance learning has actually been effective during this couple of weeks that we're enduring all of this craziness.